Welcome back. In the previous video, we were able to display all the genres here. So what we are going to focus in this video is when we click any of these genres here, we want to filter the movie that has these particular genres. Okay, so let's go back to the code and show you where we want to do that. So I'm inside the movies component, movies component here, and like I always say, the implementation of your API that you are working with, that determines what kind of functionality that you want to implement in your project, right? So now this API accepts another query string. So let's add that query string to it. So when you add an operator, and let's add with underscore genres, and it's equal to some ID. So what it means is that when you pass an ID of a genres here, it's going to filter this movie that has this particular genres here. So if I add this ID to it, I'm not sure this ID exists. So let's see, and you're going to get an empty movie array. So we see that it's empty, right? Because that ID doesn't exist, right? But if you try, so let's go to the genres here, and then we are console log all the genres here. So let's check our console and see that if you have the genres here. So let's copy one of these, and then you see that we have an ID. So if you fetch by this ID of 28 here, in place of this ID that we don't know, let's add 28, and see that at the end we're going to have some movies. There we go. And we can add many of the IDs here, so we can comma separated and say 12. So it also has this general ID. So that's the logic we are going to implement. So lucky for us, we have this already. So when we click on this one, we want to implement two things. When we click on this one, we want to select. When we click on this one, we want to build an array of what we have first selected and pass the IDs to the API to fetch this particular movie that has this genres ID. So if you look at the final project, let me refresh this one. When I click on action, you see that it has moved from this gray color and pushed me into this array. So I call this one selected genres. So like that, like that, like that, like that. You see that it's filtering. At the end, there's no movie that has all these 4 genres here. So that's what we are going to do. So first thing is that we need to keep track of what we have selected. So let's go back to our code. I'm inside my movies component, and then let's keep track of what you're going to select. So let's call this one use state. Let's keep track of this use state, and let's call this one selected genres. And by default, let's give it an empty array, and let's make this one capitalized. All right, so we need to send these two as a prop to the genres, because when we click on that one, we want to update that. So let's pass those into this. Call this one selected genres here, and this one is equal to the selected genres here, and then this one is also equal to set selected genres. So now we can now destructure this. So for me, I always like copy because I don't want to make any typing mistake. So when I come to genres component, I can destructure that one too. And then let me come back to movies again and select this one and go to genres here, because I find sometimes I mistakenly types the words wrongly and it gives me some bug. I cannot determine where it's coming from. Cool. So now I have this selected genres here. So next is that when I click on this chip, all right, I want to add the one I've selected into the array of what selected genres here. So because of that, we need to create a function that's going to help me to build up all those I have selected. So let me call this one handle add function, and let me call this one, as the name implies, is called what? Const handle add genre, and it's equal to, and this function will take the genres that I'm going to add, and then it's going to give me and return this. So here, if you try to console log the genres here, console.log the genre here from this function, you could see that we have the genre that we are clicking on. So let's console log this, and let's pass on click to this chip function. So on click now is equal to that function, and it's equal to give me my handle what add genres function, and let me pass in the genre that is coming from that array. So with this, let's check it out and see what we have here. Now let me open the console. Let me work on the one that you are working on. This is our project, this one here. Cool. So let's open the console here, and when I click any of these ones, we see that it's displaying it inside the console, right? So now I want to keep track of what I'm typing, right? So I have to, here I want to take the one I have selected, all the selected genres here, and update that. And I'm going to use a JavaScript spread operator to get that one done. So to be able to update the selected genres, I'm going to use this function called set selected genres, right? So here inside my add function, say set selected genres, and then here I'm going to spread the default one called what, selected genres, and I'm going to add the one that I've selected from that array. So with this in place, if you come back to movies component, and then for let's console log the selected genres here, we see that we are building up all the one that we have selected. So let's console log that and show you that what you are clicking is indeed is adding up to the selected genres. Okay, so now let's refresh the application, and then let me clear the console here and let me add. Okay, it says that selected genres is not a function. Where is it? Let's go to the genres here. Oh, it's supposed to be set selected genres, not set. Okay, set. Is it set selected? Okay, like that. Sorry, the function. All right. So let's put your eyes here. Let's refresh one more time. Let me clear the console and then put your eyes in the console. When I click on that, you see that on line number 17, first is 1. Let's add one more, and there's adding up. Another more is add. So we are keeping track of that. That is cool, right? So the logic is that when I add this one, I click and add to this array, I want to remove the one that I have clicked on, right? So I want to refresh the genres again and then remove that one from here. So we need to also update that, and I'm going to use the set genres, the one that we pass in set genres here. And this one, we're going to filter all the genres that we get, right? Set genres here. Let's call this one. Let's pass in the genres here, and then let's do JavaScript function called filter. And for this filter, right, it takes the individual what genres here, and then let's return. So if the genre ID is not equal to the one that we pass in its ID, then this is called the optional chaining, right? Sorry, the optional chaining. Than using if there's genre and using AND operator, right? So I have to make sure that I use this question mark. This called optional chaining. I've explained this one in my previous video. So with this, if you try to go back again and then let's click on any of these, you see that it's moving from that, right? It's moving from that. It's going, right? There we go. Cool. You see, it's gone, right? So now here comes, when we get this one, the next step is that how can we build up those arrays and give it as comma separated arrays and pass it to the API. That's another task, right? Because now we are getting the one that we have selected inside our movies component here. So next is that how can we convert those arrays from this selected movies and pass to the API here. Alright, so here comes another logic, right? So because of that, we are going to create a utility function, alright, and then you are going to pass, that function is going to accept the arrays and convert into this. So let's head over to our utils here, right, and then let's create one function and call this one genres IDs.js, right? So how are we going to build up to have something like this, comma separated for comma this, comma this, comma this, comma this, comma this, right? So this is a function. That's what the function is going to do for us, and pretty simple. So let's call this one const generous IDs is equal to this one. We're going to take an array of all the generals that we are getting, right? And let's call this one what selected general, because I'm going to pass in the selected generals here, and this function is going to return comma separated array. So let's first of all let's check. So if the selected generals here dot length, right, if it is less than 1, then let's return an empty string, right? Like that, let's return an empty string. But if we have an array of that, first let's make a variable here and say const, and then let's call this one const is equal to the generous ID, right? Generous ID is equal to the selected generals, right? We're going to use map function to reduce it, right? Map function, and then we get back all the generals here, the individual ones. Let me call this one general here, and then for this one let's return only the ID, right? The ID of the general, like that. Cool. And when we get that, we need to reduce it, right? Using JavaScript method. You can even do chaining here, but let's also call this one, and then let's return the general's ID here, and let's add reduce function dot reduce, right? When we reduce the function, this function takes two parameters, the accumulator and the current, right? So if you're not familiar with reduce function in JavaScript, so this one is a function that we get back to. So let's wrap this one in the function here, and then it's going to return, right, our predefined or formatted what array. So it's going to return the accumulated, and then let's add plus this comma separated using that, and then let's add our current, like that. There we go. So now if you call this function and pass in an array, right? So let's export this function. So let's export default the generous ID, like that. So now how can we call this function? We can call this function inside the movies right here, and we're going to pass in the selected generals here. So let's require this function here and call this one is it generous ID? I forgot the function name. Let me check again. Yeah, generous ID. Okay, fine. I've auto imported like that. As you can see, it's here. So now let's pass in the selected generals here. So let's console log the function and see what we are getting back. So console log the generous IDs, or let me can we make a get generous IDs? Where is it? Generous ID, and pass in the selected generals here. So let's try it out. Is it these IDs? Let's check again, because generous IDs, and okay, exactly. So let's check it out. Oh, it's not defined, I'm sure. So let's come, oh, this one. Let's export this function. Yeah, cool. So let's come back to movies here and then require it well. All right, so this function rather, and then it's this function rather. All right, so let's refresh it. Console log is not a function. Oh, console.log. All right, cool. So let's check it out and see. Let's open the console. Let me clear it. Okay, so when I click on this, you see we have 84. When I click on that, you see it's adding up the values. When I click on this, it's adding up. Did you see? Adding up. There we go. So now we can now pass this one to that, to the API. Cool. So now let's go back to here, and next is when you get back the selected generals here, let's assign this one to variable, and then we can pass that one to the function. So let's call this one IDs equal to that. To be precise, let's call this one genres IDs. Okay, and let's pass this one here instead of this hard-coded IDs, right? So let's pass it here and make it like that and pass in here. So now let's try it out and let's hope for good news. So by default, it's giving us that, right? So I think if you click on that, nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens. Okay, it's filtering out, right? The problem was that we need to re-update the component. So I'm inside my movies component here, and then anytime the selected genres changes, you need to update the component to fetch the current one. So let's head over to the where we are fetching the movies and pass the selected genres as another word. Selected genres here as a dependency depends on. Alright, so with this, let's refresh it, and when I click on action, let's see that as what reflected, refresh, and then we get that. You see, we get that, we get that, and there's no movie. But we want to keep track of the one that you have selected and display the one that we haven't selected, two of them, right? So let's also do that and display that. So inside the movies genres here, right, we are looking through and get the one that we have selected. What about the one that we have not selected, right? So this one are the selected one. So sorry, these are the original one, right? So let's display the one that we have selected as well. Cool. So here we will also get all the selected genres here from this one. So we can also look through and get that one done, right? So first, let's check here. Before we look through here, let's display that. First of all, we are going to check if there is selected genres here, right? Then let's go ahead and then map through that. So .map like that, and here too we get what? The individual what? Genre like that, right? And then let's return some JSX. But this time around, we are going to return the chip component, right? So let's provide the chip component here as that. Cool. All right, I'm not sure. I think we have one more bracket here. Okay, know that I think the syntax. So let's do it again. All right, sometimes. Okay, cool. So now here we have access to the individual what? Genre here inside this, and then we can quickly return what? JSX, and then here let's return the chip component as that. Cool. So the same process, you need to pass in all these styles, right? So for now, let's provide a color, different color for this one from the previous one, this one. So let's provide color, and let's give this one, is this secondary or primary color? The first one is, let's give this one primary color, but our primary color is weird. I'm not sure I'm going to get that. So let's check it out. If you have it, you see we have that, but so let's add our own custom styles, right? Let's call this one style, and let's give this one the same pattern. All right, so I think let's add this and say color, and let's give it gray. That looks more, check it out. Okay, I think gray is okay, right? Don't worry, it's okay. All right, so next is, let's also add all the props here. Let's call this one clickable as well, right? So when you click on that, clickable, and here the most important is what? The value, right? The label. So the label here, we also want to display the label, and this one is also from the genre we got, right? .name. So the same one, the same as the one that, so let's check it out and see. You see that we have it, right? When I click on that, it's selected. Cool. So I want to also remove. When I click on this one, I want to remove and push this one back again, right? So let's do that one. I think the gray color is too, so let's go back to coolest colors and get some gray color and then place it there. All right, so let's continue on the finish loading. So next is, let's also provide a size. You can increase the size. So let's add this color, let's say grayish style color. Okay, I think it's okay. This is okay, right? So let's try it out and add it here, mustache, and this color, and check it out. And say, oh, suppose background color, right? Not, so let's give this one background color. Okay, yeah, cool. There we go. So when you click on that, oh, it still looks something. So let's give it more gray this color. I don't like that. Okay, I think this is okay. Oh, this, yeah, this color is okay. So let's add it here. Make it more that it has been grayed out. Okay, it's okay. So whatever you want, you can. Okay, cool. So now let's provide on delete. So let's, when I provide on delete function here, we also want to remove that. So let's go ahead and create a function called handle remove. This one is handle what? Handle add, and let's call this one handle remove. So you can copy that. Then let's make our life easier. Then here, let's call this one handle remove. And then the same thing, but here the set selected generals here is always equal to what? The selected generals here dot filter. So let's start from scratch, otherwise we confuse here. All right. So here we also get the individual generals here, and let's call this one set selected generals here, right? And we are going to also filter out all the selected generals here, right? Dot filter. Right, and this filter we get back what? The one that we have selected. So let's call this one selected, and this is going to return the selected ID, which is not equal to the one that we passed in. Cool. So if you get that, let's also update the set generals here, set generals, right? And let's also spread up all the generals we got. And then let's add what you also add in. So let's come here on the chip here. Let's add on delete. This is from Material UI. And then for on delete, we're going to pass our function, right? And call this one handle remove. Handle remove generals, and we pass in the general we got. So with this, let's check it out. Right, you see we have that. When I click on that, we see that it's removing from that. Cool. And then we get back what we want. There we go, we got it. So I think the hard part of the project is almost done. The next one is like duplication. That's where I spend more time on the movies. Cool. Alright, so now I think it's working like that. And it's look pretty good, right? Cool. So here ends the video for the filtering using these generals here. But we are not done yet. What has left is that maybe you want to display some loading, or if there's an error here. Alright, so let's do that in the next video.